In contradistinction to Hitlerite Germany, the Soviet Union and its allies are waging a war of liberation, a just war, for the purpose of liberating the enslaved peoples of Europe and the USSR from Hitler's tyranny. We have not and cannot have such war aims as the seizure of foreign territories and the subjugation of foreign peoples. Our aim is to help these nations in their struggle for liberation against Hitler's tyranny, and then to leave it to them quite freely to organize their life on their lands as they think fit. This is what Joseph Stalin famously said on the 6th of November 1941. Today, as we stand in late October 1956, we see that whether Stalin is dead or alive, for the people of Hungary, nothing is and will be further from the truth. Welcome to Season 1 of TimeGhost Cold War coverage in our series War to War, where we cover the events of the decade after World War II that brought man from the brink of destruction to the threshold of the stars. I am Sebastian Brandstetter. In June 1956, Hungary, just rid of its Stalinist dictator Matyas Rákosi, is simmering with hope and fear, yet still under Soviet rule. In Budapest, intellectuals and factory workers exchange anxious glances, emboldened by signs of change across the Eastern Bloc, including Khrushchev's, the new head of the USSR's, deliberate departure from Stalin's course, and the cautious reforms in Poland. Hungarians nurtured aspirations for a more humane, reformist socialism, even as the dogmatic Stalinist regime of Rákosi stubbornly clung to power. By June 1956, discontent erupted first in Poland, where workers in Poznan took to the streets. The Polish regime brutally suppressed the revolt, but eventually conceded to one key demand. Władysław Gomułka returned as Poland's leader in mid-October. Hungarian students witnessing Poland force Moscow to compromise saw an opportunity. Secret police files and ration cards did not deter them. When Polish colors fluttered in Warsaw, Hungarians flew their own flags with crimson holes punched where the Soviet emblem used to be. On October 23rd, the calm breaks. On a mild autumn day, thousands of young Hungarians converge on the Bem statue in Budapest, a monument to a Polish hero of 1848 that symbolizes Hungarian-Polish solidarity. Students from Budapest Technical University called the meeting. They carry Hungarian flags and chant for the return of Imre Nagy, the reformist former prime minister who once promised change, social liberties, and a loosening of the state's iron fist. Initially, the current Hungarian government hesitates, first banning the march, then lifting the ban amid confusion over whether Moscow had approved it or not. Without clear instruction from the Kremlin, they cannot properly direct their own security forces, so the crowd walks on in an atmosphere of carefree hope. At Bem statue, the speakers invoke patriotism and liberation, messages that clash directly with the current regime. They read poems, celebrate Hungary's 1848 heroes, and praise the Polish fight for freedom. Nervous party functionaries bustle around, uncertain whether to clamp down or withdraw. Supposedly inside a nearby apartment, senior reformers, including one Imre Nagy, gather. They compare rumors. Could this be the moment they have been waiting for? A chance for change at the top? They agree that a Polish solution might be possible. Nagy should be asked to return as prime minister, but only if fellow reformers are given key posts as well. So they draft a plan. Nagy will return as premier, while the old Stalinist clique of Ernogere and others is purged from government. Nagy's allies envision a revamped Politburo composed of reformers and friendly centrists, and under a new party chief, someone like former Interior Minister János Kádár. Crucially, they pledge, if Nagy takes power, his supporters will join him in government so that he is not isolated. For now, the students' peaceful demands echo in the corridors of party headquarters. By mid-afternoon, the demonstration remains orderly. But then, a large procession heads towards Parliament, where current Prime Minister András Hegedűs is addressing the Central Committee. In Parliament Square, the crowds swell, and elsewhere in the city, on Felvonolassi Square, a giant Stalin statue is torn down amid cheers. Crowds wave flags with holes burned through the red Soviet star. The young protesters present a list of demands: withdrawal of Soviet troops, a multi-party system within a socialist framework, rehabilitation of political prisoners, and accountability for the secret police. The city police do not intervene. Some officers even hand over weapons to workers or students, or quietly defect to the protest movement themselves. By evening, chaos and inspiration have taken hold of Budapest. A group of students tries to take over the state radio station, Radio Kossuth, to broadcast the revolution's demands. Machine guns lock them out at the door. Then shots ring out, and after midnight, several students lie dead or wounded on the sidewalk. And people in Budapest fall into a stupor. Government officials blame the incident on counter-revolutionary elements, but the truth spreads among the populace. Hungarian students have been killed for wanting to be heard and for wanting to speak. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union is paralyzed by indecision. In the very early morning hours of the 24th, Khrushchev and the Politburo secretly meet in Moscow. On the one hand, Foreign Minister Molotov snarls, "Communists are being murdered," and insists on immediate action. Khrushchev, on the other hand, is plagued by doubt, lying awake over Hungary's fate. He weighs his options over Lisbon brandy and Yugoslav cigarettes. How best to proceed? Eventually he decides, let's use the troops already stationed in and around Hungary to quell the unrest there. As morning dawns the 24th of October, 5 Soviet divisions, that's some 30,000 soldiers and just over 1,000 tanks and self-propelled guns, have been mobilized across Hungary. 6,000 men, 290 tanks, 120 armored personnel carriers, and 156 artillery guns have already arrived in the Hungarian capital. A city in uproar and open defiance greets them. Street barricades appeared overnight as workers and students organized volunteer militias. In parliament, the old guard scrambles. Hegedus, openly shaken, steps down as prime minister before noon. The party's presidential council calls Nagy to lead the new government. He returns to his old office amid great fanfare. Radio Kossuth then carries an ominous new message from the new prime minister. Martial law is declared in Nagy's name, a step he later insists he did not authorize. In the confusion, a radio announcement even claims the Hungarian government has asked the Soviets for help, a move many contemporaries and current historians attribute to the hardliners around his predecessor, not Nagy. Police officers now exchange nervous glances with uniformed rebels on the sidewalk. At noon, Nagy addresses the nation over the radio again, his voice tired and resolute. He promises reform, greater freedom, and the removal of Stalinist leaders. His first words bring ecstatic cheers. Hungary will have a fresh start. Yet, Nagy also feels overwhelmed. Witnesses describe him as dazed, exhausted from the night's stress, almost bewildered by the crowd's adulation. He's the only respected political figure present, but for now, he clings to party rules. Only gradually does Nagy realize the demands around him represent a genuine uprising. As crowds dismantle the walls of the Ministry of the Interior and topple communist iconography, insurgent delegations flood the parliament with demands. Russians go home, free elections now. Nagy urges calm. He assures factory committees and militia leaders that they have his sympathy, but insists on order. He refuses to let the fighting spiral out of control. The situation is unprecedented. The government and the rebels operate side by side, but often at cross purposes. In the West, news of the arrival of Soviet troops sends shockwaves, but no rescue is forthcoming. In Washington, President Eisenhower had been preoccupied with re-election and the growing Suez crisis abroad. On October 26th, he convenes the National Security Council to discuss Hungary. Watch Moscow carefully, he warns his generals, fearing that any intervention might escalate into a global war. In public, the US declares moral support for Hungarian aspirations, although US Secretary of State Dulles already articulates a new position just one day later, the 27th. We do not look upon Hungary and Poland as potential military allies in NATO, he says, but hopes they will become part of a new friendly Europe. In effect, the United States signals it will not challenge Soviet dominance militarily. Radio Free Europe, funded by the CIA, broadcasts fiercely anti-Soviet commentary that many listeners hear as encouragement to stand firm, even though its programs never explicitly promise Western military help. Behind the scenes, Nagy's new government meets at all hours. His advisors press him to open talks with the insurgents. By evening, they secure a meeting between the rebels and the government. Still, Nagy stresses the importance of calm, unity, and order. But the old Stalinist guard still lurks. So no clear order ever goes out to the Hungarian army to fight the Soviets. Between the 24th and the 27th, most units stay in their barracks or are told only to keep order alongside Soviet troops, while a few local commanders quietly side with the insurgents on their own. Nagy keeps postponing any general call to arms, hoping he can still bargain with Moscow instead of plunging Hungary into open war, a hope shared by most Hungarians. But each passing day sees more and more Soviet army soldiers and tanks arriving in Budapest. On the ground, Soviet troops have orders to restore order, not to turn Budapest into rubble. So from the 24th to the 27th, tank crews initially avoid indiscriminate fire and often shoot in response to attacks rather than leveling whole blocks. Armed workers and students seize party and police headquarters in several districts. And in the 8th district, around Kilian Barracks and Corvin Passage, Colonel Pal Maleter and the Corvinites dig in behind barricades, their rifles and Molotov cocktails aimed at Red Army armor. By the time Soviet unions test these positions in the days leading up to October 28th, they find that brute force alone cannot simply roll through the capital without far heavier losses and reinforcements. In Moscow, Khrushchev's remaining uncertainty vanishes in a final set of decisive meetings. Soviet intelligence reports that the insurgents have declared their Soviet overlords enemies and threaten to impose a Titoist national road. The Kremlin demands a swift, crushing response. The Chinese, however, initially urge Moscow not to intervene. Anastas Mikoyan, who earlier came to Budapest hoping to broker a compromise, also realizes it's too late for gentler measures. By October 31st, the Soviet Politburo authorizes a general invasion. Nagy quickly learns the Soviets have every intention of taking over. In response, he declares Hungary's neutrality and appeals to the United Nations, asking the world to protect his country's independence. However, this only cements Moscow's belief that any compromise has failed. On the night of October 31st, Nagy records a new broadcast, aired November 1st, stating that Hungary will become a sovereign neutral nation and will no longer be part of the Warsaw Pact. He urges Hungarians to maintain calm while offering to meet any Soviet terms short of annexation. Back in the Soviet Union, Khrushchev again moves quickly. He flies by secret routes to confirm his plan with allies, briefing Warsaw Pact leaders under the cover of night. Late on November 2nd, he even meets Joseph Broz Tito on a Yugoslav island. He tells Tito that Hungarians are about to be liberated from anarchists, and now that communism is in danger, it is worth any price to save it. How Tito reacts is unclear. Some accounts suggest Tito encouraged Khrushchev to finish the job, and even offers trapping Nagy in the Yugoslav embassy. Others argue the opposite, that Tito genuinely sought to protect Nagy and Hungary. Whatever the case, in Budapest, Nagy is already bargaining with rival factions. On November 1st, he grudgingly agrees to form a broader coalition. It briefly seems that one-party rule has been broken, even if free elections remain a distant hope. From Munich, Radio Free Europe praises the uprising in sharp anti-Soviet tones, and many Hungarians hear its broadcast as further encouragement not to settle for half measures. But in Moscow, the date is set. On the evening of November 3rd, Soviet agents storm a room where ceasefire talks with the Hungarian delegations are underway. They arrest two of the key negotiators. By midnight, Hungary's borders are sealed by Soviet troops and tanks. These preparations speak more loudly than words. The campaign to crush the Hungarian uprising is on schedule. At dawn on November 4th, Soviet forces strike. By now, they comprise 17 divisions. Some 60,000 Soviet army soldiers are committed to crush the revolt, and Budapest is the focal point of their anger. The assault is brutal and swift. Street by street, artillery shells and tanks tear into rebel positions. Budapest's long night of hope collapses into a single day of horror. And this is also where the word tanky comes from, describing, at least back then, Western communists supporting the armed Soviet intervention. Nagy wakes up early to give one last broadcast at 5:20 a.m. In measured tones, he declares, "Soviet forces have attacked our capital to overthrow the legal Hungarian government. Our troops are fighting and the government is in place." The Free Hungarian radio also broadcasts its last words.
Világ népei, az 1000 éves Magyarország őrtornyain kezdenek kihújni az utolsó lángok. A szovjet hadsereg megpróbál szétzúzni bennünket. Páncélosaik és ágyúik Magyarországon dübörögnek át. Asszonyaink, anyáink, leányaink veszélyben vannak. Mentsétek meg lelkeinket! SOS! SOS! Lehet, hogy most szólal meg utoljára az utolsó szabad magyar rádió. Világ népei, hallgassatok meg! Segítsetek! Ne tanáccsal, ne szavakkal, hanem tettel! Ne feledjétek, hogy a szovjet barbár támadását nem lehet feltartóztatni. A következő áldozatok ti lesztek. Segítsetek! SOS! Világ népei, az igazság és szabadság nevében segítsetek! A hajó süllyed, a lángok kihújnak, óráról órára sötétebbek lesznek az árnyak Magyarország felett. Halljátok meg kiáltásunkat, nyújtsatok testvéri kezet, mentsetek meg, segítség, segítség, SOS, Isten veletek és velünk.
But at least Nagy's words ring hollow. The defense ministry, still guided by the old Stalinist clique, had already instructed most units to remain in their barracks and not to oppose the Soviet advance, as you know. Moments after his speech, Nagy slips away with 42 comrades, reformist ministers, and even members of his own family to seek sanctuary in the Yugoslav embassy. There, under the protection of their Yugoslav hosts, he and his fellow leaders can only hope the Soviets will respect their claim to diplomatic asylum. Outside, Budapest is consumed by chaos. The red star on every Hungarian flag is gone. The black hole flags of 1848 and 1944 return. The Soviet army fans out through the city. The parliament building, radio stations, and military barracks fall one by one. In the morning mist, Soviet flags rise over the bridges and then the parliamentary steps. The iconic parliament, symbol of Hungary's sovereignty, is pounded by artillery and then stormed. Hundreds of insurgent fighters and many civilians die in the streets. Hospitals overflow with wounded. By day's end, the outnumbered and outgunned rebels are crushed. All hope for Hungary is extinguished on that long Sunday. When the streets finally clear, Soviet infantrymen patrol calmly, and a fearful silence replaces the cheers. Estimates emerge of the cost of resistance. All over Hungary, between 2,500 and 3,000 Hungarians have died, and about 13,000 more lie wounded. On the other side, 700 Soviet soldiers lie dead, and about 1,500 more are wounded. By nightfall on November 4th, Imre Nagy remains a hostage, or, as some historians believe, a guest at the Yugoslav embassy. He is lured out on November 22nd. Later, in Soviet captivity, he will tell his interrogators that he has been deceived, betrayed by comrades who once promised a more humane socialism. Meanwhile, a new Hungarian government takes shape under the watchful eyes of Soviet army commanders. Within hours, János Kadar, who earlier spoke of "our glorious revolution," emerges as the Kremlin's choice. Now, the government too is formed under the close supervision of Soviet generals. By the end, a communist government, purged of its moderates and reformers, is in control again. The people of Hungary come to feel that they are once more under an iron fist. Across the country, Soviet troops enforce the new order. Soon, thousands of anti-government activists are arrested. Nagy, his ministers, and thousands of others will be tried as traitors. In the early 1960s, about 26,000 people will have been brought before the courts, some 22,000 sentenced, around 13,000 to prison, and roughly 200 to 300 executed, though the exact figures are debated. Nagy himself is executed as a traitor on June 16, 1958. The streets that had trembled with revolt are now hushed. Barricades are dismantled and artillery craters filled in. In the spirit of the moment, the world watches. On November 4th and 5th, American leaders express horror. Eisenhower privately laments, "I think about them all the time. I wish there were some way of helping them." But he has no practical plan. The US rejects Kadar's regime at the United Nations, yet when the Soviets veto every resolution in the Security Council, there is nothing more to do. Backstage, the White House reminds its ambassadors in Moscow not to mention Hungary if offered a summit, avoiding confrontation for the time being. In Western European capitals, the reaction is similar. Sharp condemnation is voiced in newspaper editorials and parliaments, but no state will risk war. It does not help that much of the Western world is also firmly preoccupied with the Suez Crisis. To learn more about it, either check out our War to War episode or our designated miniseries. As Hungary burns, thousands of worried Hungarians abroad appeal to the free world. Demonstrations erupt from New York to London. "Stop the bloodshed," they cry. American radio carries their voices, but in the end, only a trickle of material help, mostly blankets and food, crosses the Iron Curtain. Refugees fleeing the crushed revolution, nearly 200,000 by early 1957, are welcomed abroad as moral victors. In Washington, Vice President Nixon meets some of them and weeps. He had once predicted Soviet brutality would benefit US propaganda. But for the moment, Americans hope only that other nations will draw lessons. Kadar's government, meanwhile, tries to get its hands on the remaining conspirators, Cardinal Midzenti, for example. Unlike most, he manages to escape, rushing to the American embassy, staying there for the next 15 years. The government forces slam down the university debates and step back into the Soviet fold. The Kremlin proclaims the end of counter-revolution and restores order. Hungarian independence is sacrificed, a nagging question in Soviet council chambers put to rest. No debate remains over who lost Hungary. In 1956, Hungary's uprising was smashed by force, yet its spirit endured as a lasting symbol of patriotic courage. For a few brief days at the end of October, their nation briefly wrestled with a giant. Ordinary Hungarians learned that defying the empire was possible, even if ultimate success was not. The tale of October and November remains a subject of hushed reverence under the new regime. Streets, speeches, and textbooks try to erase it, but in private homes and churches, the story lives on. Under the crushing Soviet occupation of post-November Hungary, people keep the memory alive that a moment came when tanks met flowers and brave youth stood up to a superpower. The revolt's failure is remembered as a betrayal by Moscow and by the West's empty words. Deep in their hearts, many Hungarians swear never again to be slaves. The night of 1956 ends, but does not destroy the dream of freedom. It will flicker again in the future years under the watchful Soviet eye. For now, Hungary and the city of Budapest falls quiet under fear, but the spark of 1956 has been lit, and history will long remember Hungary's courageous, if tragic, stand. If you want to know more about another siege of Budapest, make sure to check out our Second World War channel and join us on TimeGhost.tv or patreon.com. Excelsior!